What if everything you believed about salvation was a lie? Sister Maria Therese, a devoted Catholic nun, spent her entire life in prayer, fasting, and strict religious devotion. She followed every rule, obeyed every tradition, and believed she was on the path to heaven. But when she died and came face to face with Jesus, she discovered a terrifying truth. She had missed him completely. Jesus revealed a shocking message. Millions are deceived. They trust in religion, sacraments, and rituals, but they don't truly know him. And worst of all, time is running out. This is not just a story, it's a warning. What Sister Maria saw beyond the veil changed her forever, and it may change you too. Are we putting our faith in religion instead of a relationship with Christ? Are we blindly following traditions without truly seeking him? Stay until the end of this video, because what you're about to hear could mean the difference between salvation and eternal separation. And before we continue, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss powerful, life-changing testimonies like this one. Now let's dive into Sister Maria's terrifying journey beyond death. Sister Maria Therese was born into a devout Catholic family, where faith was not just a belief, but a way of life. From the moment she could speak, prayers filled her lips, and the walls of her home echoed with the sounds of hymns and the rosary. Her parents instilled in her a deep reverence for the sacraments, the saints, and the teachings of the Church. By the time she reached adolescence, Maria Therese had already decided that her life belonged to God. She would not marry, nor would she seek a worldly career. Her heart was set on serving Christ through the holy path of a nun. At just 18, she entered the convent, exchanging the comforts of her family home for the rigid discipline of monastic life. Days were spent in prayer, fasting, and acts of service, while nights were filled with deep contemplation and intercession for the world. She dedicated herself wholly to the rituals of the Church, believing that through devotion to sacraments, penance, and confession, she was drawing closer to God. Her faith was unwavering, her commitment absolute. To Sister Maria Therese, salvation was found within the traditions she followed, the rosaries she recited, and the strict religious discipline she upheld. Yet, despite her years of unwavering dedication, something was missing. She often felt an emptiness she couldn't explain, a longing that no amount of fasting or prayer seemed to satisfy. There were moments, deep in the silence of the chapel, when she felt a whisper in her soul, a call beyond the walls of tradition, beyond the echoes of recited prayers. But she dismissed it as a distraction, believing that complete obedience to the Church was the only path to holiness. Then came the day that changed everything. It was an ordinary evening of prayer, the candles flickering as she kneeled in devotion. But as she closed her eyes and whispered her petitions, an overwhelming weakness took hold of her body. Her heart pounded, her vision blurred, and within seconds, darkness engulfed her. She collapsed onto the cold stone floor of the convent. What happened next was beyond anything she had ever imagined. It was the moment her journey into the afterlife began, the moment she would discover a truth so shocking, so life-altering, that it would change everything she believed about salvation, faith, and the very nature of Jesus Christ himself. Darkness, silence, then awareness. Sister Maria Therese found herself hovering above the cold stone floor, staring down at her own lifeless body. The nuns around her were panicking, their voices urgent as they tried to revive her, but she felt nothing. No pain, no fear, just an eerie sense of detachment. She wanted to reach out, to tell them she was still there, but no words came. Instead, she felt an invisible force pulling her upward, away from the scene of her death. A soft glow appeared in the distance, growing brighter with each passing second. It was not a blinding or harsh light, but warm, inviting, almost alive. As she moved toward it, she felt an overwhelming peace, a sense of love so intense that it made every earthly worry seem insignificant. The weight of years spent striving for holiness, the burdens of strict rituals and penance, melted away. Yet as she drifted further, she became acutely aware of something else, an undeniable truth. She was dead. The realization sent a shiver through her being. Was this judgment? Was she standing at the threshold of eternity? She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Yet now, face to face with the unknown, she felt an unsettling uncertainty. Had she truly done enough? She reached out instinctively, but before she could question further, the pull became stronger. It was as if she were being drawn by something or someone who knew her deeper than she knew herself. Shadows of her past flickered before her eyes, the endless prayers, the hours in the confessional, the solemn processions of faith. She had lived her life in complete devotion to the church. And yet, as she approached the radiant light, she sensed that she was about to face a truth far beyond the traditions she had followed. Then, just as she prepared to cross fully into this mysterious realm, the light shifted. Shapes emerged within it, beings of light, waiting for her. And in that moment she knew this was only the beginning. As Sister Maria Therese drifted closer to the radiant glow, she realized she was not alone. Silhouettes emerged from the brilliance, figures bathed in pure golden light. They were unlike anything she had ever seen on earth. Though their forms were somewhat human, they seemed to be made of energy itself, radiating peace and wisdom. Yet what struck her most was the way they communicated, not with words, but with thoughts, pure and undeniable. She felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of familiarity, as if these beings had known her since before time began. They welcomed her with a love so profound that it made every earthly attachment seem trivial. In their presence, she felt completely seen. Every hidden thought, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice she had made in the name of faith. There was no condemnation, no shame, only understanding. One of the beings stepped forward, gesturing with a movement that was both silent and full of meaning. Without warning, her entire life unfolded before her, playing out as if projected onto the fabric of eternity. She watched herself as a child, kneeling beside her mother, learning to pray. She saw herself entering the convent, eyes filled with devotion. Every prayer, every act of penance, every confession, it was all there. But as she watched, something troubled her. Though she had been devout, something was missing. The beings allowed her to feel what had been in her heart during each moment, and to her shock, she saw that much of her devotion had been driven by duty rather than love. She had followed the rules, observed every sacrament, but had she ever truly known the one she was serving? She wanted to ask them, to plead for understanding, but before she could, the scene changed. The light around her intensified, and suddenly a presence greater than all the others appeared. Every fiber of her being recognized him instantly, though she had never seen him face to face before. Jesus. And in that moment, everything she thought she knew about faith, salvation, and her very purpose was about to be turned upside down. The light grew impossibly bright, yet it didn't hurt her eyes. Instead, it wrapped around her like the warmest embrace, filling her with a love so intense that she could hardly stand under its weight. And then he was there, standing before her, radiant beyond human comprehension. Jesus. Not the painted figure from church walls, not the lifeless image on crucifixes, but alive, real, and more powerful than she had ever imagined. Sister Maria Therese fell to her knees, overwhelmed. She had spent her entire life worshipping him, dedicating herself to his service, and now here he was, looking at her, not with judgment, not with anger, but with eyes that saw straight into her soul. She expected praise for her devotion, for her years of sacrifice and obedience, but instead his words struck her like lightning. "You have been faithful in religion," he said gently, "but you have not truly known me." A breath caught in her throat. Not known him? How could that be? She had spent her life in prayer, in fasting, in confession. She had followed every rule, obeyed every tradition. Wasn't that enough? Her mind raced for an explanation, but deep inside she already knew the answer. She had known about Jesus, but she had never truly known him. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the truth. Her faith had been built on rituals, on sacraments, on traditions passed down through generations. She had sought holiness through the church, through religious observance, but never through an intimate relationship with Jesus himself. He had been a distant figure, someone to serve rather than someone to love and walk with daily. Jesus reached out, and as his hand touched her, a flood of understanding filled her soul. She saw the difference between knowing of him and truly knowing him. It wasn't about religion. It was about relationship, about surrender, about seeking him personally, beyond the boundaries of tradition. She wanted to speak, to ask for forgiveness, to plead for another chance. But before she could, he showed her something even more shocking, something that would shake the very foundation of everything she had believed. In an instant, the light around her shifted, and Sister Maria Therese found herself standing in what felt like an endless space. Before her, countless people stretched as far as the eye could see. Millions, maybe billions. Some were dressed in religious garments, others held rosaries, prayer books, or sacred texts. There were priests, nuns, monks, pastors, and devout followers from every background. They were worshipping, kneeling, reciting prayers, partaking in religious rituals. At first, she felt comforted. These were people of faith. Surely they were walking the path of righteousness. But then she noticed something strange. Their eyes were searching, their expressions uncertain. There was no joy, no peace. It was as if they were going through the motions, desperately trying to grasp something just out of reach. Jesus' voice echoed gently, yet with unmistakable sorrow. "They have devoted their lives to religion," he said, "but they have missed me." Sister Maria Therese felt a wave of sorrow crash over her. She saw people clinging to their sacraments, trusting in their confessions, fasting and rituals, believing that these acts alone would save them. She saw entire lives spent in religious service, yet never truly encountering Jesus in a personal way. The weight of this revelation hit her like a storm. She watched as some of the people turned toward the light, their faces filled with sudden understanding, reaching desperately for Jesus. But others stood firm, clutching their religious traditions as if afraid to let go. They had been taught that salvation was found in the church, in their works, in their faithfulness to rituals. They did not realize that none of it could substitute for personally knowing Christ. Tears streamed down her face. She had been one of them. She had lived in the convent, believing that her devotion to religious practices was enough. But now she saw the truth. Jesus was not confined to traditions, sacraments, or institutions. He was personal, he was near, and he had been waiting for his people to seek him directly. The vision burned into her soul, and she knew she could not stay silent. But then Jesus showed her something even more terrifying, what became of those who never realized the truth. The vision shifted again, and Sister Maria Therese found herself standing on the edge of a vast chasm. A heavy darkness stretched below, swirling like a living entity, deep and endless. From within it, cries echoed, agonizing, desperate, filled with sorrow beyond anything she had ever heard. She clutched her chest as the weight of suffering pressed down on her. She saw figures within the darkness, people who had once been devoted to religious practices, priests, nuns, lifelong churchgoers. Their faces were twisted in anguish, their hands reaching upward, yet unable to escape. They had spent their lives believing they were saved by their religious works, but now, in eternity, they realized they had never truly known Jesus. "We thought we were following you," one soul cried out. "We were faithful. We obeyed the church. We confessed our sins." Jesus' voice came, filled with sorrow. "I never knew you." The words pierced Sister Maria's heart like a blade. These people had believed they were safe. They had trusted in their sacraments, their traditions, their religious leaders, but they had never formed a true relationship with Christ. They had performed the actions of faith without ever surrendering their hearts. She watched in horror as they wept, pleading for another chance. But the time for repentance had passed. Their separation from God was final. The truth was clear now. Religion had never been the answer. Only Jesus himself was. Sister Maria fell to her knees, trembling. "Lord, what can be done? How can they know the truth?" Jesus turned to her, his eyes full of both love and urgency. "Go back, tell them." Her heart pounded. She had a mission, but before she could react, everything shifted again, and she felt herself being pulled away, back toward her earthly body. As Sister Maria Therese felt herself being pulled away from the vision, Jesus' voice filled her entire being. It was not just a sound, it was a command, an urgent plea that carried the weight of eternity. "Tell them, Maria," he said. "Tell them that time is running out." She could barely process what was happening. The cries of the lost souls still echoed in her mind, their despair seared into her spirit. Jesus' presence was overwhelming, his love infinite, yet his warning was clear. Millions were living under a deception, believing that religious rituals could save them when, in reality, only knowing him personally would. She saw flashes of people on earth, priests leading ceremonies, believers attending Mass, countless souls placing their faith in traditions rather than in the living Christ. Some were sincere, genuinely seeking God, but others were complacent, relying on routines passed down for generations. And then she saw something even more terrifying. So many were running out of time. "The world is blind," Jesus continued. "They trust in systems created by men, but I am the only way. I have always been the only way." Tears streamed down Sister Maria's face. She had to go back. She had to warn them. But she hesitated. Would they listen? Would the church accept this message? Would people believe that a devoted nun had seen something that contradicted everything they had been taught? Jesus seemed to read her thoughts. He stepped closer, his presence radiating power and authority. "Many will reject you, just as they rejected me, but speak the truth. Some will hear, and their souls will be saved." With those final words, a force pulled her backward. The light faded, the heavenly realm disappeared, and suddenly she gasped for air. She was back in her body, back in the convent, back in the world she had once thought she understood. But now, nothing would ever be the same. She had seen the truth, and there was no turning back. Sister Maria Therese awoke to a world that no longer felt like home. She had seen eternity, stood in the presence of Jesus himself, and returned with a message that would shake the very foundation of her faith. But as she sat up in her hospital bed, weak and disoriented, she knew this truth would not be welcomed. At first, she tried to share her experience with the sisters in the convent. She told them about the light, the beings of glory, and the moment she stood before Jesus. But when she revealed his warning that religion without a true relationship with him led to separation from God, she was met with silence. Then, disbelief. "Maria," the Mother Superior said sternly, "you must have been confused. You had a near-death experience, but your faith has always been strong. We are saved through the church, through the sacraments, through obedience." "No," Maria whispered, shaking her head. "Jesus said, he said we have missed him. It's not about religion, it's about him." She saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of hell, not fear of deception, but fear of what her message meant. If what she said was true, then everything they had built their lives upon had been incomplete. And that was something they could not accept. Word of her testimony spread quickly, and soon she was called before church officials. They listened, skeptical, and warned her to stop speaking of such things. "The church is the body of Christ," they told her. You are straying into dangerous thinking. Even her family turned away. Maria, please, her sister begged, tears in her eyes. Don't abandon everything we believe in. But she hadn't abandoned Jesus. She had found him. Despite the rejection, despite the pain, Sister Maria Therese knew she had only one choice. She had to obey Christ. She left the convent, stepping into an unfamiliar world with nothing but faith. She began to share her story with anyone who would listen, warning them of the deception she had seen, urging them to seek Jesus directly. Many scoffed. Some called her a heretic, but others listened. They wept as they realized they had been relying on religion rather than relationship. They turned to Jesus, truly knowing him for the first time. Sister Maria's mission had begun. She was no longer a nun bound by tradition. She was a messenger of Christ, carrying his urgent warning to the world, and no rejection, no condemnation would silence her, because time was running out. Sister Maria Therese returned from death with a message so urgent that it cost her everything: her place in the convent, her acceptance in the church, even her relationships with those she loved. But she could not stay silent. Jesus warned her, time is running out. Now the question is, are you ready? Have you truly known Jesus, or have you only followed religious traditions? Are you seeking him personally, or are you relying on rituals to save you? Don't wait until it's too late. He is calling you now. What do you think about Sister Maria's experience? Do you believe religion alone can save us, or do you agree that only a personal relationship with Jesus matters? Let us know in the comments below. And before you go, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we have another powerful testimony coming up next. You won't want to miss it. Click the video on your screen now.